to 7 Investing Now, a show that teaches you how to take a long-term view on investing by better understanding what's happening in the market now.
Good afternoon, 7 investors, and welcome to the Friday edition of 7 Investing Now. My name, of course, is Daniel Brooks Kline, and I'm the host of the program. I'm joined today by Simon Erickson and Steve Symington for a jam-packed episode. Guys, this day is insane. How did we plan this way? Simon, take everyone through all of the public-facing and members-only things we're doing today.
Well, we are effectively juggling 17 things at the exact same time right now. And we've got a lot of exciting stuff to talk about. I think it's a good time to have, actually.
Yeah, so this morning we recorded a mock pick, which basically it's to show non-members what our process is like for the calls we're recording this afternoon, which are our picks. Each one of us makes a stock pick each month, and we spend 15 minutes to a half hour sort of explaining to everybody, here's why we picked it, and then we take questions. We're also doing our Perspectives podcast, where we pick something that's going to be public-facing, where we talk about something that maybe people haven't seen, and we go through it. Steve, you have to edit also going up today our advisor updates. Those are members only. This is a lot on our plate, but we are very excited for 7 Investing Now. We got a jam-packed show. We're going to talk Netflix earnings at the top. Then we're going to go into sort of the non-political aspect of some political stuff. We're going to talk about what's going on with the incoming administration, some of the hurdles they face. But again, we are not going to talk politics. We're going to talk impact on the market. We would love your questions and comments. We're also going to talk about the biggest beverage company in the world. It might not be who you think it is, but let's hit the ground running with Netflix earnings. This is our top story. Netflix stock soared on Wednesday. It was up about 15% to $577.77. So a little nod to us in their closing price per share. That's the largest gain the stock has made since it closed up 19% in October 2016. That's largely because they said two things. The first is they've surpassed 200 million subscribers. That is an astounding amount. It's a very global company. So more of their subscribers are not in the US than are in the US. And the second piece of that is they said they were going to be free cash flow positive. Simon, you wanted to talk about that. What does that mean? This surprises me, and I'm not entirely sure it's sustainable, but what does that mean?
This is a huge deal for Netflix. It means that the company, after paying all of its operating expenses, including its content budget, is rolling out additional free cash flow for shareholders. That is a really big deal because for so many years, it was Netflix was plowing more and more money into creating its own original content, to buying others' content, to make sure that library of video content it had for subscribers was as massive of a buffet to choose from as possible. So for Netflix to say, hey, we're going to step off the accelerator a little bit, we're going to be producing free cash flow by the end of this year and in years going forward, that's an interesting conundrum, Dan, that I think that we can talk a little bit more about on this show because it could have big implications for the business and its investors.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of an illusion. So in some areas, they're spending more money because they have to catch up on production of things that slowed down. But there's a lot of things that are not in production. So I'm not sure 1 quarter of free cash flow says that they're going to make money. And Steve, we'll get you in a minute here. I've got questions for both of you. But Simon, this scares me because if I'm Netflix, I am making sure I have billions of dollars on hand to buy name brand content. And we've seen this with Disney+. Disney+ has WandaVision, and that's its new show. It's in the Avengers universe. It's for the next 2 months. It's all we'll be talking about. And they put out essentially one show over 2 months. They have some little things, but for the most part, during that time period, Netflix is putting out a movie a week. Those are movies that cost $40 million to $250 million. Why are they not trying to buy James Bond or whatever else is out there that's still independent? Why did they not bid on, say, DreamWorks? Maybe they did, but they didn't get it. This seems to me like a foolhardy strategy. Your thoughts, Simon?
It's a very different strategy than what we've seen with Disney, which is going the power law, right? Make The Mandalorian and make that the biggest show that everybody wants to watch. Netflix is use the recommendation engine data that it collects and then go after those niche specific shows, a Rocky Horror Picture Show that have a cult following of people that really want to follow these smaller shows that aren't these mega blockbusters. At the end of the day, we only have so many hours to watch shows. I tend to agree with you that we should be focusing those on the bigger budget pieces that more people will be watching. But again, it's a difference in strategy. The overall important takeaway is that Netflix right now is not advertising supported. Content is everything, and subscriber numbers have looked thus far very, very strong for them.
Steve, I'll bring you in here. So Netflix's strategy is, okay, we have an algorithm. The algorithm tells us that our audience really likes Adam Sandler. And that's a bet that they made that was correct because he's a big ticket guy. But in a lot of cases, they're going, okay, our algorithm says if we have The Rock in a movie with a penguin and somebody wearing bunny ears, that would be a minor hit and it would keep people. So in my opinion, they're throwing 100 shows at a wall where 2 good ones would do. What am I missing here?
I think we tend to underappreciate how smart Netflix is and how they use their data. I do agree. They might be possibly better off, just dropping some money on, some acquisitions to pick up some really big properties. I saw somebody tweet the other day something to the effect of the best way to find out if a movie's on Netflix is to ask if you want to watch it. And if you do, it's probably not there. So that's kind of how it feels sometimes. But there's enough there that I'm not canceling my subscription. And it sure turns out a lot of other people aren't. And their growth has been pretty impressive. And I think maybe people are underestimating just how effective their strategy is, regardless of what we want to be there. So it making their service sticky and keeping people around.
So we'd love your questions and comments on Netflix. We are going to take some unrelated comments in between segments. So get them in. Wherever you're watching, in theory, you can comment and we will be able to see it. Just say hello if you'd like to. We are an interactive show. We're always happy with that. I know Netflix is really smart, but I think they've built up to this place where they have so much you feel like you can't leave. Let me ask both of you. I haven't watched anything on Netflix in months, and I find, in general, there's 2 reasons for that. One, they cancel shows now. So if I watch season 1 of something and I don't know there's going to be a season 2, that to me is the old network model. I don't want that. So I don't watch things on Netflix until they've kind of finished, which means I'm sort of like years behind. Steve, are you watching anything on Netflix right now?
Yeah, I think our Schitt's Creek is one of those shows that we've been watching lately, and I'm sure my wife sits downstairs, and if she's folding laundry or doing something else, like she'll be watching Dawson's Creek reruns, and they've got enough old like shows like that and new shows that are kind of coming out that we're catching up on. We watch Netflix all the time, and the kids will just kind of peruse it every once in a while, and it's kind of just it's always there, and we use it often.
Schitt's Creek was actually an example of a good content acquisition. They bought a name brand that didn't have a streaming home at the height of its popularity. The show was going off the air. It won a whole bunch of Emmys. A lot of people were interested. It was never that big a show during its height. It was always it was on Pop TV in the US. Good luck finding that. So I've got questions for both of you. We're going to go through these. Then we are going to go through some of the questions in the queue. First question, and we'll go Steve first, then Simon. How much more can they grow? Is 300 million subscribers possible? Steve?
Yeah. I think that's the short answer. I think that's plenty possible.
And we're done. We will be back on.
No, I do think I think their ceiling's a lot higher than people assume it is, and I think that's definitely possible. And it's just sort of one of those things that it's priced in such a way that you say, why not? There's so much there, and I think the value's there, and on a global basis, I think that's where we get a lot of the growth going forward. Obviously, you can only go so far in the United States, where you have a few 100 million people total. But yeah, I think globally, if they play their cards right, they can continue growing almost indefinitely from here.
And Simon, your thoughts? Can they get to 300 million? And I'll throw in a wrinkle. How quickly can they get to 300 million?
Yeah, what Steve said is my answer. I agree that it's definitely possible. And, to answer your follow-up of how quickly, Netflix added 100 million subscribers in the last 3 years, and most of that came internationally. So is it possible to do it again? Yeah, I think it absolutely is.
I think it's going to be a tough go, actually. We're seeing cord cutting in the US has gotten really wobbly because a lot of people are cutting the traditional cord, but adding streaming television options. And the one thing Netflix has done a really good job with that I don't think gets talked about enough is they're on every platform. Now, we expect our streamers to be on Roku. We expect them to be on, your Google device, your Apple device. But my Comcast cable boxes have Netflix native, so I don't have to switch inputs. I use a TiVo as my DVR, as my cable box on my main TV. Netflix is integrated to that. So again, the content is much easier to get to. That's a really big positive. I'm going to say, though, I'm pretty down on Netflix. I keep Netflix because my wife watches Netflix. And I know some of that is I consume a lot of comedy on Netflix. And right now we're not in a period where new comedy specials are getting recorded. I haven't found it a particularly good value. But I think some of that is the contrarian in me being like, oh, everyone says Ozark is good. All right, I'm not going to watch it. So Nishan... Yeah, go ahead.
Let me put the over-under at 300 million subscribers for Netflix globally on January 22nd, 2024. 3 years from now, is it Netflix above or under 300 million global subscribers? I would take the over, but it sounds like you might be taking the under on that one.
Yeah, I'll take the under. I think it takes a year longer than that. I think they'll get there.
Take the over as well. So
yeah. Let's ask our viewers. I mean, are over or under 300 million Netflix global subscribers by January 22nd, 2024, 3 years from today?
Let's throw in a couple of comments from our viewers while we do that. Nishan Shan says, he points out that Schitt's Creek is originally a Canadian show. Yeah, it was actually financed by, I believe, the CBC, but there was a deal to distribute it. So some of the money to produce the quality of show. And he also points out, I assume I apologize if it's not. He also points out that Netflix gives you exposure to a lot of non-North American content that we might otherwise not get. And that's true to a point. A lot of the British shows you see on Netflix, you were getting on BBC America, but it is easier to find it. The other major expense Netflix has, and I'll let you weigh in on this, Simon, is when they go to a market, they have to localize the content. That's something Disney has largely already done for DVD and other delivery. And they have to create market-specific content, whereas I would say the Disney content is evergreen. Cinderella or Star Wars plays pretty much everywhere. Pixar movies, maybe some of them, the nuance doesn't play, but you can be bored by Up in no matter what country you're in. You could follow along the incredibly simplistic plots of Toy Story. I'm teasing because people know I don't like Pixar movies, but this is one of those. So let's get to question number 2. Or Simon, weigh in on that if you like. It's an inherent advantage for Disney, in my opinion.
I think so. And Dan, I think that my takeaway on this is that Disney is not playing the same game that Netflix is playing. Disney has got a century of content that are movies people love and we watch on a daily basis over here at the Erickson household. Netflix does not have that pocket, those deep pockets of content. It has to play a data advantage. It has to learn regionally what people are watching. And it's not a really large organization. Netflix does not have a ton of employees. It's relying on the AI, the recommendations engine, and it's making strategic bets, which is why you don't see Netflix going out and making these mega blockbuster movies like Disney is, or even not even movies, but Netflix shows, original shows. It's trying to be strategic. It's trying to make smaller bets. I think that we're probably going to see that continue internationally in the next couple of years.
They're taking the over, by the way, on Facebook.
They're making them.
Right. Yeah.
They're just not resonating the way, say, an Avengers does. So when you take something like, the Bright, the movie where Will Smith was battling orcs and there were blue people and I have no idea what was going on and I watched it, that movie cost $200 and something million to make. And they say it was a hit, but it's a hit in that whatever their algorithm tells them it's a hit. They've had very few movies that cross over into public consciousness. I'll say the one where Sandra Bullock had to be blindfolded, that absolutely became as big a hit as something that was a box office success. But aside from that, it's very rare. And even when it comes to television shows, you do have Bridgerton, you have The Crown, you have a handful of things that have become pop culture in recent years. And we're going to talk about why that doesn't work most of the time in a little while. Steve Symington, is there a ceiling on price? They're charging, it's $11.99 in the US. Can they go to $19.99 eventually? Can they go to $29.99? Is there a ceiling?
Eventually, I don't think they can do it the way Hulu Live did it, where they had a live streaming version of their service with commercials and cable basically. But I think it went something from $39.99 to $49.99 to $54.99, and all of a sudden I'm like, why do I have this, and why did I cancel my cable? That's silly. But Netflix is very methodical about the way they raise prices. So it's one of those things where they just add a couple bucks and nobody even thinks anything of it. So I think they've got a long runway for increasing prices and thereby enjoying more operating leverage in the business. And I think that'll be a catalyst for the stock each time they do it. But yeah, I think they have a lot of room to get there.
So when you have 200 million subscribers, every dollar in price you add is $2.4 billion in revenue. Simon, do you think they have a ceiling? Do they have to tread carefully here?
Yeah, I think so, Dan. And I think that Steve's description of being methodical is the right way to think about this. There's a lot of options now for streaming. To be honest with you, I don't know really what is a lot of the times a Netflix show versus an Amazon original show versus something else that's coming through our Amazon Fire Stick. And it's kind of all blending together now, and you just hear about the shows that you want to watch. You discover them on the home screen, and then you run with it from there. And so then it becomes a matter of what's the must-haves, and how many can you realistically subscribe to. Everyone thinks digital streaming is the future. There's not a single content producing company out there that doesn't see this as the wave. And so the question becomes, as we split off from bundled cable TV, what are the must-have shows, and how much are people willing to spend on that? And that's exactly what Netflix is, like to steal the words from Steve, methodically answering right now.
So let's look at the bigger picture here. You have people who are cutting the cord. Many of them are only sort of cutting the cord, because if you like sports, you probably need to get Sling TV or Hulu Live or dare I say Fubo. You have to get, and they're all the same, by the way. They're all just slightly different packaging of content. So we've talked about this before, and I don't want to bag on Fubo, but Hulu has live sports is their commercial. Like, that's one of their commercials. And now they're running a commercial. Hulu has more than live sports. These are all just skinny cable bundles where either you're making choices, like I have Sling. And when you get Sling, you can get a very basic, I think it's $25 package. And then you can layer on and say, well, I'd like more sports. I'd like more news channels. And those little bundles cost $5. It's all a question of how they do it. But we've got HBO. We've got Paramount, which is the CBS All Access rebranding. We've got Disney Plus. There are a lot of top tier content companies out there. Do you think at some point people make choices and Netflix, if they don't have current hits, maybe gets rotated out? Steve, you get to go first here.
Yeah, maybe they do. I just can't see it in the near term. That's I think where we sit is that it's going to be a long time before we're there. And I think the current state of things, the current market leaders are pretty happy with where they are. And I don't see that changing over the next couple of years.
Simon, your thoughts here?
I agree. I mean, that's why we do series. That's why we make 5,000 Avengers movies. I mean, you got to get the foot in the door first, and then you just roll out, year after year, the brands and the characters everybody loves. I think that Netflix is there. There's a handful of people that are going to be able to do that. I think that's one company that is.
I think it becomes very tricky in a multi-person household to get rid of Netflix. As an individual, I'll tell you, except for the fact that T-Mobile pays for most of my Netflix bill, I don't need Netflix right now. I'm not watching a lot of it. I'm not watching any of it, frankly. And even the shows I did watch, I used to watch the CW shows like The Flash and Arrow, and you can watch those on the CW app. And it's a little annoying because there's a commercial, like where there would have been commercials, there's one commercial, and it's usually always the same commercial for the whole episode. But, that's not that bad an experience. And I often find myself not considering Netflix, but I do agree. Most houses are going to keep Netflix as just sort of the default. There's always stuff there. And I've never really understood the, hey, I'm just watching The Office in the background, but that does seem to be something they do. Even one of our viewers, I believe that's The Vegas, says my consumption of Netflix went way down when they lost The Office. So that is important to a lot of people. Last question on Netflix. Then we're going to take some of your questions and comments. What do you think Netflix is doing wrong? Simon, you get to go first.
Yeah, I mean, they mentioned in the shareholder letter that they're considering a stock buyback right now. And if I don't think that they've done that yet, so maybe this is a future wrong they might commit, but we're selling at all-time valuation multiple highs. Not all-time perhaps, but the last 5 years, Netflix is a really expensive stock right now. You don't generally want to be buying back your stock when the market is already telling you, we're giving you the benefit of the doubt. We're expecting so much out of your stock price right now. I would rather see some larger content IP acquisitions. Dan, you and I have talked about this many times, or maybe even Netflix just, builds that cash hoard a little bit so they can go out and make some other really big purchase. I don't think that I like the idea of a stock buyback right now.
Debuting next week on Netflix, Cash Hoard, a new show. Steve, your thoughts?
What Indian Creek for the Symington family?
I think that's the one thing is I would hope they'd make a more astute capital allocation decision with the cash that they have. Take the opportunity to run up the score, make a content acquisition, create some more decent content, and if say the market pulls back and valuation multiples contract or something and the stock gets hit, maybe strategically pursue that, but don't do it right now. I think you have to be smart about stock buybacks. I would almost take a dividend over that and let shareholders determine what to do with the capital that you're dispersing. But yeah, I'd be hesitant to accept that as a good decision for buybacks, and that might be the only thing they're doing wrong right now.
So before I tell you what I think Netflix is doing wrong, I'll share my Twitter handle. That's @worstideas7. You can see it right there on the screen. And I do that because I'm going to say something that outrages people who like this. But Netflix is shooting itself in the foot by taking a show, a heavy buzz show, and reducing all the episodes at the same time. So imagine if The Mandalorian came out and all 10 episodes were there. How would I know when Simon watched it? There's no rule of thumb, are you supposed to stay up all night and watch it? Then we could talk about it Monday. Do I wait 10 weeks if you want to watch one episode a week? From a publicity standpoint, it means a hot show gets talked about for 3 days, and then it becomes something that's not in the cycle. Whereas, even take WandaVision, which is, again, a minor entry in the Marvel Universe. It's important because it's the first Marvel Universe show, but it wasn't supposed to be. That happened because of COVID. You go to any pop culture entertainment sites, you go to The Ringer or Entertainment Weekly, and they have 4 articles on each episode and 2 podcasts breaking it down. Whereas when the next season of Stranger Things comes out, there'll be 1 article because it's only there for 72 hours. Then it doesn't matter. I understand that they've conditioned people to love the idea of binge watching. It's bad for business. They shouldn't do it. It undercuts their product. We're going to take a question as we seg into what we're watching. But before we do that, Simon, we just made some pretty big changes on our website. Why don't you tell the 7 Investing Now audience what we've done? Because it is really exciting.
Yeah, we did. We love our 7 Investing website. Please come check it out at 7investing.com. But we made some improvements to it, like you mentioned. Our content is much easier to find now. 7investing.com/research is now providing both our publicly available and our subscriber only content on the same page. You can't get into the subscriber content unless you are a subscriber and you're logged in at the time, but you can at least see everything in the exact same place. And that's been so helpful for people that were saying, hey, I remembered, you guys wrote that article or you had that perspective, I was having trouble finding it on the site. If it's a written article, it's appearing right there. And then also our live stream and our podcast, which are other freely available contents that we provide as well, now have their own dedicated pages as well. So you can always go back, find Dan's live streams from when we began recording them, find all of our podcasts where we're bringing in external guests and also talking as a team, all on their own dedicated pages. We have separate entries for each one of those. We're going to make it even easier to search through those for specific topics or even words that you heard us talking about in the podcast. And we'll be providing transcripts for all of them in the very near future too. So we really appreciate everybody who watches these shows. I think one of the challenges for us was saying, oh, I remembered you guys were talking about something really neat. How do I find that on the site? We're going to make that as simple as possible for people that visit 7investing.com.
Seven Investing is always evolving. We are always listening to our members. We listen to the people who watch these shows, and we appreciate how much this show has grown and how much our subscription service has grown so quickly. If you'd like to be a part of the paid side of our business, that's seveninvesting.com/subscribe. There's often also in our Twitter feed, we share member referrals where the member gets a free month if you subscribe and you get a deal. So watch the @7investing Twitter, because there's a decent chance you can not only get a deal for yourself, you can give one of our members a free month. And we have a couple of members that, boy, I'm going to be working well into retirement based on how many free months they have. I'm never going to retire. This is too much
49.
fun.
49 free months, I think, is the high water mark right now. Not paying until 2025.
I was going to say, you said 49. I was insulted. I'm only 47. You were going in a different direction. We're going to take a question from ZL here that segs into our what we're watching topic. So ZL says, do you think Southwest is a good investment here since Biden, that's President Joe Biden, has accelerated COVID prevention measures and vaccines are slowly rolling out? Steve, I'll let you weigh in first here. I have my own thoughts on Southwest. I'll go last.
I was going to say, you probably have a better informed opinion on Southwest. This is ticker LUV for anyone who's following. A little play on their taglines, but and their logos. If I had to buy an airline, Southwest would probably be the one. I'm not entirely convinced airlines deserve a place in my own portfolio. I've never been particularly compelled by airlines as a business, and I'd be very wary of airlines that are taking on new debt, even if it comes in the form of government assistance through the pandemic. That's part of the reason that we saw Buffett sell out of his positions on airlines last year. He sold out when it became apparent that aid was going to be required. And, he made the argument that, say you have airlines taking $14 billion in government aid to stay afloat, that makes shareholders eventually, it's got to come out of earnings, and makes them that much poorer. That's not to say they can't be compelling investments purchased at the right price. But I think there's a lot of other good places to put your money to work. But if I had to buy an airline, I will say Southwest would probably be the one.
Simon, they're based in Dallas. You're in Houston. Your thoughts here on, and I'm going to get to the seg part of this, but feel free to take it if you like.
Oh, nothing else I can really add, Dan. I'd actually defer to you on this one. I know you follow the airlines much more closely.
Yeah,
than I do.
So let me jump in. Nothing changed about Southwest because Joe Biden took office. And that's kind of my political warning as we head into the next segment. So if I had to buy an airline, I'd buy Southwest. I'm an avid customer. I love the fact that today I have a trip booked for late March for Vegas, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to be vaccinated by then, so I'm pretty sure I'm going to go on that trip. And I needed to change the day I was leaving. I went in and I did that this morning, or the day I was leaving Vegas, the day I was coming home. And I did that, and it was actually cheaper. So, oh, great. I've now saved myself. I got some points back because I booked it with points. And then I went, I wonder if I can fly from the closer airport in West Palm Beach, which is about 3 miles down the road, as opposed to Fort Lauderdale, which is an hour down the road. I changed it to West Palm Beach, and it got cheaper again. What airline allows you to do that? They're a customer-friendly airline. That being said, I wouldn't invest because it's such a capital-intensive business. It's so dependent on so many outside factors. I mean, weather is always an issue. Certainly, you've seen with the pandemic. To me, there's just so much risk and so much money being spent to maintain an airline that I'm a giant fan. I root for them. I'm very proud as a customer of how they treated their employees during the pandemic. They're really the only major airline I think has really put customers and employees first, but I wouldn't invest. But my thesis on that doesn't change because we're going to have a faster pace of coronavirus vaccine and stricter measures. I do think it's exciting, that we're seeing some of these things happen, but that doesn't change the long term. It just maybe speeds it up. It's not a bad investment. It's just not where I'm going to go. So for what we're watching, we're going to talk about the market impact of the changes in control of the U.S. government. What we're not going to talk about is politics. This isn't about whether it's left wing or right wing. This is about the practical changes. And I will say it up front that largely it doesn't matter that much. Even in a fairly extremist government, the president, Congress, they can only do so much that impacts the market. But Simon, you want to talk about President Joe Biden's first moves in office. That includes rejoining the Paris Accord, canceling the Keystone Pipeline, and I cannot think of the Keystone Pipeline without thinking of the Keystone cops building it, which is not how it's happening, and that's a dated reference, but still that's a... and in general, sort of climate. Maybe that brings in solar energy. So, Simon, what are your investing takeaways here?
Yeah, I mean, the Paris Accord was one of his first acts in office, right? Is putting the U.S. back in the Paris Agreement, which is basically every country on the globe, minus OPEC, the countries that are in the OPEC cartel, saying we're going to contain global warming, that we don't want to increase the temperature of the Earth by more than 2 degrees Celsius, more than pre-industrial levels. And the U.S. is part of that too, right? And so this is a huge undertaking. This is a huge comprehensive framework between all the countries on the globe that are emitting carbon dioxide, including China. That's a part of this too. And it's legally binding in certain ways. But, from an investing perspective on this, we don't want to go political, like you said, Dan. We just want to say, what is this going to mean for investors? I think that this is going to have an impact, that we're going to see much more stringent emission standards, specifically for the coal industry, that will be a boon for solar industry going forward. And we've seen at the federal level, we've seen tax credits, whether those are production tax credits, whether those are incentive-based capital tax credits. And then we've also seen at the state level a lot of renewable energy standards too. But I do think that this is something that's going to take a long time. Let's not go out there and buy every solar stock tomorrow because, Biden's gotten us back in the Paris Accord again. But I do think that when you think in terms of decades, this is kind of where the world is all agreeing that we need to address this issue. And I think given a long-term time horizon, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years, if you're patient to wait that long, the solar industry is definitely something that should be on our radar as investors.
But solar is also a bit like cannabis, right? Where the pricing is very, very aggressive, which can sometimes make a good industry very difficult to invest in.
Yeah, that's right. And, especially for solar panels themselves, because you can't just flip a switch and the lab can all of a sudden make the ultimate efficient solar panel, right? It takes time. There's different types. If you want crystalline silicon or thin films or different technologies, it doesn't happen immediately. And then you've also got other places with much lower operating costs, labor costs like China, that can make them a lot cheaper than the US. And so I tend to stay away from solar panel producers themselves. More interesting to me are the components that go into the balance of the system, especially for residential. And so one thing that I've been following for years now is these devices called microinverters. You've got to convert the DC current that's produced by a solar panel into the AC current that can be accepted by the grid. We've seen some companies that have really been able to capture some pretty decent pricing on this. I mean, there's a company called SolarEdge, which is an Israeli company. That's a 7-bagger in the last 2 years. It's up 700% of its stock price 2 years ago. But it continues to play a niche, very important niche component to solar balance of system. Something like that is, I think, worth a lot closer of a look. It's not as price elastic, but you still have to have something like that to get the maximum ROI on your project.
Simon, you're going to talk ESG investing in a second. Before we do that, I want to address a comment by Koppel Stoneman 28, who sort of wanted us. So our tease for this episode, is it too late to buy Netflix? We didn't directly answer the question. So when we're done with this segment, we will, I feel like we did, but we'll actually state the answer to that for each of us, because we look at your comments. Someone is watching the show. That's what we teased, expected a definitive answer. When we finish this segment, we will give you a definitive answer. But Simon, right now, something Biden has already done is good for ESG investing. Explain what ESG means, and then talk about what's actually happened here.
Yeah, so here ESG talked about a lot of investing. It's environmental, social, and governance. It is companies that are doing well by doing good is kind of one of those taglines that stuck out there. But they're really making a conscious effort to not pollute, to make sure that they are, being fair to their employees, and then also that they're addressing shareholders as well. And I think that with a lot of the moves that Biden has already made in office, this is going to bring ESG investing back into the limelight a little bit more. Specifically, we've already seen a Biden executive order that called for a review of the Labor Department's 2020 ruling on ESG investments. So what this was doing was it was making it more difficult before this, based on this Labor Department ruling, to get ESG type investments into the default options of 401k plans. And so a lot of people that aren't going out there and individually saying, oh, okay, I've assessed this. This is an ESG company. I'm going to invest in that on my own. If those companies were packed into default options that maybe your employer gave you for a 401k plan, it would be easier for you to select into these with this review of this ruling. And so, I mean, that's step one of what I think is kind of a lot of steps we're going to be seeing and hearing about this year and the next 4 years too, that I think that ESG kind of comes back into the forefront. People start paying a little bit more attention to that because there's policy behind it. The unit economics of renewable energy are definitely improving. And I think that there's some important investing kind of takeaways from a lot of that's being captured in this.
And thank you, Simon. Steve, you wanted to talk about how we've known this from the beginning. So when Biden introduced his stimulus plan, it was $1.9 trillion. But this is a bit like if you and I go to Simon with maybe like a travel request, and we're like, okay, we want to go to the trade show in Vegas. We'd like a private plane. We each want our own suite. And then Simon negotiates us down to we'll be FedExing you there, and you'll be sleeping one of you watching guarding the other one in a restroom, and then taking turns. Like, it's all about negotiating time. No, Simon lets us travel in reasonable style here. I'm teasing a little bit. When such a thing is legal and allowable.
I'm working on the corporate jet, Dan. Working on that next.
Hey, you can get a 737 MAX for a song. But Steve, there's pushback on the 1.9 trillion, but he never expected to get this, right? Like this is any political party. Again, not talking left, not talking right. You set the bar much higher than what you think you're going to do, so you can begrudgingly sacrifice some things that you never expected in a million years were actually going to get approved.
Right. And it reminds me of the song The Other Side in What Greatest Showman, right, where they negotiate back and forth on what percentage you'll be taking. And that's exactly it. We talked a little bit about the $1.9 trillion stimulus proposal. It's not law. It's not signed in. A little bit last week. And on one hand, we have the White House that's arguing that it's critical for Congress to push through stimulus payment and coronavirus relief as soon as possible. And there is definitely an argument to be made for that. And I guess one thing to keep in mind is that over $1 trillion of Biden's plan contains direct support for individuals and families. And on the other hand, Republicans are predictably pushing back. We expected this on certain parts of that plan they don't like. And even some Wall Street analysts stepped out and said, wow, this proposal was a little larger than we thought. And they're considering that kind of a net positive. And the market reacted positively to the fact that he was asking for so much right after they passed a $900 billion plan only recently. And our challenge, I guess, for this team is how to approach this from an investing standpoint. Our economy obviously needs a bridge as the pandemic continues, and to really hold us over and bolster us. And we've already seen evidence that the last stimulus payments actually have already had a positive impact on several industries, including restaurants, for example. We saw a sales lift, and however temporary, this is something that can hold us over and really prop up the economy until it can kind of get back on more sustainable ground once the pandemic really wanes. So I think this is sort of the juggling act that we find ourselves in right now. And I do, everybody expects that they will come to terms on a stimulus agreement that won't be 1.9 trillion, but it also won't be 500 billion. It'll be, we'll find somewhere in the middle. And I think, everybody wants to find a bipartisan solution to this. And I think that will be
well, not everybody, but we'd like to hope most people want to find that. Yeah. Steve, let me jump in with something. So the markets tend to focus on those checks, the $1,200 checks, then the $600 checks, now the possibility of a $1,400 check. And I agree, that's a short-term stimulus. You get that, and if you're in real trouble, it doesn't help that much because that's 1 month rent, and depending where you are, it's less than my one month rent in this beautiful home I'm lucky enough to live in. That being said, I actually think the biggest piece of this is extending enhanced unemployment benefits, because if you take 10 million, however many people are out of work right now. I apologize, I forget the exact number. And you give them a lifeline, that's people who are putting money up the stream. They're paying their rent, they're buying food, they're meeting basic, clothing needs for their kids. To me, I think the market will not be excited about that, but that's the biggest thing that we're not seeing. Steve, your thoughts there?
Right. And I think if memory serves, it was a $400 billion or $400 per week extension for those unemployment benefits. And that's definitely bigger, I think, than most people realize. And it's not as visible because, if you're a family of 5, you're not going to get a $7,000 check for the four. You're not talking about that, but $400 a week makes a big difference in addition to those stimulus payments. And that's a very big deal. And I think it was something like 3 million people fell off the unemployment cliff that happened when they sort of signed this later than we anticipated. So that's a lot of people who will be able to pay bills and feed themselves and clothe their family who otherwise might not be able to in the near term.
So Simon, I think we've done it. We've managed to navigate politics again without being political. So on Monday's episode, we're going to talk religion. We're going to no, we are not. We only get into the realm of some of these things when they directly impact the market. So right now, the actions of government have kind of an outsized influence over the market because so many people are reacting to it. But I would point out that whether we get a $1,400 check or an unemployment extension, all of these things are short-term noise. The real changes are going to be, the parts of these bills that keep some of our small businesses open, that allow the country to move forward. I'd be more excited about an infrastructure bill in 3 to 6 months that gets people working. That's really, you want to look at the long-term trends. It's good for the market if people are working. A healthy economy is good for the market. It doesn't necessarily matter how it became healthy. Steve, I'll give you the last word here.
Yes. So that's another thing to keep in mind is right after this, people widely expect Biden to propose another spending plan that will focus on infrastructure and jobs. And that will be maybe the more consequential of the two proposals that we're talking about. This first one serves as a bridge to prop up the economy. The second one will serve to really focus more on infrastructure and jobs. And to Simon's points earlier about ESG and renewable energy, we're going to have a lot of sort of corollary effects that come from that, and it's going to focus on green energy and ESG. And anyone who's not familiar with the acronym, to save you a Google, it's environmental, social, and governance issues. Companies that are responsible to that end when we talk about ESG investing. So, that will be another proposal coming up. And that's going to be, I think, even more important to the long-term health of our economy.
We'll talk ESG on a future show. Simon, go ahead. I'll give you the last word.
Thank you. The last word on this. I mean, I think that the overall takeaway for me is that it's not our place to say the government should do this, or call up Joe Biden and say, "Hey, Joe, get on the phone. Hey, I think you should do this." That's not the point of our show. The point of what we're doing as individual investors is to say, okay, what is the government doing, and how is that going to impact our recommendations, knowing that we're buying and holding indefinitely, right? We're not trying to get in and out over 6 months over a stock pick that we think is going to be hot for a little while and then it's going to go away. When you hear Steve talking about ESG investing, that's a really big deal. When we're talking about the solar industry, that's a really big deal. When you talk about the Paris Climate Accord, that's a long-term perspective. That is exactly aligned with how we want to be actually making our own recommendations. And then we're not selling. We're not getting in and out of positions. We're going to buy and hold and let them ride. And our scorecard reflects that long-term investing is the way to go if you want to compound wealth over long periods of time.
And since I'm the host, I'll take the last word. If you look at trends, they're really easy to see where we're going. We just don't know how long it's going to take to get there. So we're clearly moving towards a world with electric cars and maybe autonomous driving. Are those things going to take 10 years or 30 years? I don't think we know the answer. And I do think you can say, okay, this type of administration might make that a little bit more favorable. But we don't know if that's going to change the timetable by days or months or years. It's not going to change it by decades. So none of the trends, none of the destinations change based on who's in charge. And with that, before we hit the home stretch, let's answer the question, is it too late to buy Netflix? I am not a fan of Netflix content, as became clearly obvious today, yet I subscribe to Netflix and could see no time where I ever wouldn't. So no, it is not too late to get into Netflix. It might not be a massive hyper growth stock, but it's going to be a steady gainer that also has a lot of volatility. Steve, your thoughts on this one?
I don't think it's too late to buy it. And I mean, in the interest of full disclosure, I have a handful of shares in a Roth IRA sitting around that almost, it went up in value for as much as I paid for them. But I think if you do buy Netflix today, it wouldn't be a bad idea to maybe average into your position, because I'd be equally unsurprised if it continued to rise as I would if it fell. So, but over the long term, I think it'll be just fine. And a lot of people think, man, I should have bought Netflix 15 years ago, maybe, but that doesn't mean you can't buy it and enjoy some decent gains today.
On a show next week, we'll do a segment on market terms like average into and define them and sort of give some explanations. Because I think sometimes we do sort of throw stuff out there that will cause some of our audience to have to go to Google. So one of our shows next week, we'll make a list. So if there's terms we use that you'd like us to define or talk about more, we'll put ESG in there. Send us those terms at 7investing on Twitter or info@7investing.com, which is our email, because we want to make this a show for everybody. Seasoned investors, new investors, there are a lot of people out there that want to be in the market. We want to be their bridge to doing that correctly. Simon, your thoughts on Netflix. Should you buy? Is it too late?
I'm on a hold for Netflix right now. I would say don't sell your stake because it's overvalued, but I don't think you're getting a really great entry point. I think that the expectations are baked in. I mean, one thing that I always look at is optionality of like what is not being considered in the stock price right now. I think that it's harder to see that with Netflix. We're kind of modeling out its growth. We kind of know the whole world is its oyster now, and we've seen the subscriber growth, and that's appearing in the stock price. So I'm not jumping in and backing up the truck on Netflix, but I do think it's going to be very hard to displace. So I'm definitely not selling my shares.
So normally we take a lot more comments, but we are running fairly long today. So people like ZL and John Hins, who had some really good questions in, if you want to hit us up with those questions on the email, sometimes if a stock you're asking about is a recent pick of another paid service, we tend to wait a few days to talk about it. But for the most part, we will answer those questions, and we're only skipping them today because we've already gone 47 minutes. Stock investor commenting on my saying it's going to take 10 to 30 years for electric vehicles says, well, what about 3 to 5? I don't think we're going to have predominantly electric vehicles in 3 to 5 years. I'd love to be wrong about that. I think there's a massive infrastructure problem before we can get to that. I mean, you're starting to see more charging stations. But with that, we're going to move into the home stretch, and we're going to try to get through this quickly because we've run a little bit long here. But Sam Bailey, if you could share the graphic. This is a question I asked on the 7 Investing Twitter feed. What's the biggest global beverage company by market cap? Share your guesses here, and we'll discuss on the Friday 7 Investing Now. I brought this up because I saw this, and it absolutely shocked me. I'm going to go through some of our friend and member responses. Mabel N. said, Monster something? I forgot the full name. Joyce Hines said Coke. Parrot, probably too obvious, so therefore wrong, but I'll go with Coke. Golfer Jim, Anheuser-Busch. Parrot says that would have been a second guess. Egon says LVMH. They own Moet Hennessy. I wouldn't consider them purely a beverage company, but they wouldn't be it either.
That was one of my guesses, actually.
Just Swinging It says Coke, Pepsi, Anheuser-Busch. Hot Girl Capital Management says Monster Energy. I don't name the people. They pick their own names. Anand Khatri says Dio. I don't even know what that one is. So I'm going to say Diageo. Yeah. Oh, and that's an who owns what in India?
About the rock and roll singer Dio. Okay.
Michael Trasberg says who owns what in India and China? Diageo. That's getting close to it. Before I give you the answer, Simon Erickson, before I told you the answer a couple hours ago, what would you have guessed?
Starbucks or Coca-Cola would have been my guess.
Steve Symington, what would you have guessed?
I would have guessed AB InBev or Coke.
Simon, before I reveal the answer, I'll ask you to look at the chat and grab the couple of people that are asking for comments for definitions when we do that show last week. I saw at least one, so I can't do that while hosting. So if you could do it, that would be great. The actual answer, and Bluth123 got this, and I'm going to guess he read the same CNBC article I did, and it's Kwai Chow Mutai. That's a Chinese company, which it's named after its core product, Mutai, which CNN noted is 53% liquor and tastes like fire. It is described as like drinking razor blades. This is the largest non-tech Chinese company. It's valued at about 421 billion. Depending on, I didn't check today, Nestle would actually be bigger, but Nestle is in no way a pure beverage company where most of these are. Why did I bring this up? Because guys, had any of you ever heard of this company, which trades on the Shanghai Exchange? So it's not completely obscure. Steve, have you heard of this company before today?
No, I'll add that to the list of $400 billion companies I just learned about. And that's saying something. I mean, I literally follow hundreds of stocks. I've written about thousands of stocks. And I mean, that there can exist a $400 billion company that I'm completely unfamiliar with. I would never know.
So very quickly, let's look at the market opportunity here. 97% of Mutai is sold in China. The other 3% is sold generally to expats or people who are using it for ceremonial reasons. Now, they've tried some things like having some social media clubs in other countries. The problem with it is it's a lot like champagne, where sparkling wine produced elsewhere isn't champagne. Mutai can only be produced in one region in China, and there's only so much they could produce. So almost any stock of it gets sold instantly at very, very high prices. But this is one we're going to keep an eye on. And if you have any other $400 billion companies you think maybe we haven't heard of, send it over, because that would be a great show to do as well. Simon, I'll let you introduce this one. It's time to hit our finisher. This was your question, so I'll let you take the lead here.
Oh, go ahead. Please go ahead, Dan. I'm still thinking about the Mutai and how we can get a hold of this without it being a flammable hazard shipping.
Oh, no. We need a bottle of this for the first in-person 7 investing meeting. Sam Bailey, this was Simon's Twitter question. Share our finisher. Which one of the following emerging markets do you believe will create the greatest amount of wealth for investors during the next 10 years? 63% said CRISPR gene editing. 22.8% said quantum computing. 14.2% said the space economy. I have to be honest here, Simon. I have absolutely no idea. I'll give you the first word because this was your question.
This is me displaying what a nerd I am, looking at some of these scientific things that are going on. It's fascinating to me, each one of these. The key to the question was in the next 10 years. These are going to be really, really big trends that are taking shape in the world of medicine, in the world of computing, in the world of the space economy. I personally vote for quantum computing, which sounds unbelievable, right? This has always been a science project that's been 5 years out, and then it goes 5 years, and then it's 5 more years out. But CRISPR is going to be amazing. Gene editing is going to redefine medicine, but it's got to everything's got to go through FDA trials. That's going to be a longer time frame as well. Space economy is going to be amazing, but we know that's going to have to be perfect in terms of regulation. So that's going to take a lot amount of time. But quantum computing is so interesting to me because everyone wants the quantum advantage. All of the internet's cryptography, which means everything you have on the internet that is protected, your medical records, your credit card information, your bank account, is behind these cryptographic algorithms that no other computers can solve because computers are running at about the same speed right now. If a quantum computer comes out and someone claims a quantum advantage, all of a sudden, every cybersecurity vendor on the planet is trying to keep up frantically to change that. And all of our internet security is built upon it. This is something that I think we have to be paying more attention to.
Steve, I'll give you the last comment because I have nothing to add here.
As a computer science major, I agree with quantum computing. I've always thought it was a really intriguing niche, and it's one of those things where the quantum advantage and the revelations that will be unlocked when quantum computing begins to gain scale, I think will be staggering. And I think they'll have follow-on effects to other industries like CRISPR and gene editing and the space economy, making calculations simpler and being able to run previously impossible algorithms and previously really lengthy calculations sometimes in seconds. And I think what that will enable is it will be stunning. And I think it will really revolutionize multiple industries. So I think it's the umbrella that kind of enables everything else.
I'm still crushed that Dippin' Dots did not prove to be the ice cream of the future or the present. Frankly, they're actually delicious, but they have not done well. I'm going to share one more comment before we go. Turth P says, love listening to you guys. You are filled with positivity and investing smartness. Yeah, we try to be positive. We like what we do. So look, there are going to be companies we don't like. There are going to be companies we look at it. But even when I don't like a company, I'm rooting for it to succeed, because companies aren't these amorphous things. Like, you know, if I say, geez, I'm not that big a fan of, I don't know, CBS or Viacom or whatever name they're going by now, I'm not saying I want people to lose their jobs and the company to go out of business. I'm just saying I think there's better investment opportunities. So we are unbelievably relentlessly positive, and we are so privileged to get to do this. And we get to do this because so many of you are watching and supporting us. So with that, that finishes up today's episode, the longest ever episode of 7 Investing. Now, I almost took one more question just so we could go an hour, but we have so much more to do today that I'm not going to do that. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at info@7investing.com. That is usually Steve Symington, who uses his giant hands to, you can't see in the perspective here, but Steve is 9 feet tall. I'm like 5'7". Simon is also tall. So I'm not sure how I got picked. But for Simon Erickson, for Steve Symington, I'm Dan Kline. We will see you on Monday.